Welcome to another Explainer. So glad you're here today because we are diving headfirst into one of the most baffling historical mysteries of the ancient world. Picture this, an unstoppable, ruthlessly efficient military machine that has crushed absolutely everything in its path. We're talking about an empire that literally swallowed entire nations whole. But then, out of nowhere, it completely fails to conquer a single, relatively small capital city. It's like a massive puzzle that's kept scholars scratching their heads for centuries. And today, we're going to break down exactly what happened. And that brings us right to the core question anchoring our entire explainer today. Why on earth did the mighty Assyrian Empire conquer literally everything in sight, except for one tiny kingdom? I mean, the Assyrian war machine was the undisputed superpower of its day, an absolute juggernaut. But the moment they arrive at the doorstep of the Kingdom of Judah, boom, the narrative completely shifts. Okay, so let's set the stage by looking at the sheer Goliath-level scale of Assyria. To really grasp why this survival is so mind-boggling, you have to look at their track record. Just look at the massive entities they completely steamrolled. They wiped out northern Israel, they crushed numerous neighboring nations like Hamath and Arpad, and maybe most impressively, even the mighty Egyptian empire was eventually brought to its knees by Assyrian power. They basically controlled the entire map of the ancient Near East. Against that backdrop, Judah surviving? It seems, well, completely impossible. Section 1. The Taylor Prism and History's Glaring Omission. To really figure out what went down, we have to move past the geopolitical setup and look at the hard archaeological evidence. Because for a long time, skeptical historians thought the biblical account of Judah's survival was just a myth. That is, until they started digging around in the ruins of the ancient Assyrian capital of Nineveh. Now you have to check this out. This artifact right here is called the Taylor Prism. It's this incredibly cool hexagonal clay cylinder, and as you can see, all 6 sides are just packed with ancient text. It's literally a voice speaking to us from the past. It holds the official records of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, laying out his military campaigns in extreme detail, including his invasion of Judah. So this proves the invasion wasn't just a story, it was a very real, documented historical event. And let me tell you, Sennacherib was not shy about documenting his successes. The Prism boldly declares that his army just laid waste to the Judean countryside. According to his own records, he successfully conquered 46 fortified walled cities in Judah. He systematically dismantled all their defenses, marching right up to the very edge of the capital. And look at this number. Sennacherib wasn't just throwing out rough estimates here. He recorded an incredibly specific captive count. 200,150 people. Honestly, highlighting this staggering, hyper-specific number really drives home the terrifying reality of this campaign. The stakes were absolute. The entire surrounding countryside was devastated, leaving the capital city completely isolated and alone. Which brings us to Sennacherib's very specific, very famous mention of Judah's leader, King Hezekiah. The Prism reads, "I trapped him like a bird in a cage." Now, on the surface, that sounds like an incredibly arrogant boast from a totally triumphant conqueror, right? He's mocking Hezekiah, bragging that he has him locked up in Jerusalem. But if you actually read between the lines, this boast reveals a massive, humiliating truth for the Assyrian war machine. So here is the absolutely crucial point. It's all about what the Taylor Prism doesn't say. Notice the glaring omission here. There is absolutely zero record of Sennacherib actually conquering Jerusalem. He doesn't claim he captured King Hezekiah. He doesn't claim he deposed him from the throne, which, by the way, was standard operating procedure for the Assyrians. That whole boast about the bird in a cage, it's basically ancient political spin. He's trying to cover up the fact that they besieged the city, but totally failed to take it. To understand exactly why they failed and had to pack up and leave, we have to look at the other historical source for this event, the biblical text in 2 Kings. Section 2. A War of the Gods. The biblical account drops us right into the intense psychological warfare happening outside the walls of Jerusalem. The Assyrians didn't just use swords and shields. They totally weaponized fear and theology. And this is absolutely key to understanding how the ancient world worked. Today, we look at war as army versus army, right? It's all about technology, strategy, troop numbers. But in the ancient Near East, battles were fundamentally viewed as God versus God. If your nation won, it proved your local deity was stronger than the other guy's deity. The stakes weren't just political, they were deeply existentially theological. Knowing exactly how this worked, the Assyrian general, a guy named Rabshakeh, stands right outside the walls of Jerusalem, and he shouts up to the defending soldiers in their own native Hebrew language. He taunts them with this absolutely devastating question: has any god of any nation ever delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? I mean, Rabshakeh's logic was brutal, and honestly, mathematically sound based on recent history. He points directly to the gods of Hamath, Arpad, and Samaria. He says, look, all of these nations fell to us. Their gods couldn't stop the Assyrian gods. So why in the world do you think your God, Yahweh, is going to be any different? It is a highly calculated, terrifying piece of psychological warfare aimed right at crushing the morale of the Judean defenders by completely undermining their faith. Section 3, Hezekiah's desperate prayer. Now the focus shifts entirely to King Hezekiah. Think about his situation. He's trapped, he's surrounded by this invincible army, and his God is being publicly, loudly mocked. How do you even react to a threat that overwhelming? Well, he doesn't call a war council, he doesn't send out negotiators to surrender. According to the source text, he takes 3 immediate steps of total desperation and reliance. First, he tears his clothes in grief. Second, he walks directly into the temple. And third, he prays fervently for deliverance. He takes this arrogant mockery from the Assyrian generals straight to God, essentially saying, listen, they aren't just attacking me, they're attacking you. And the response he gets? It is staggering. The biblical God responds through the prophet Isaiah, but not with some frantic battle strategy. Instead, it's a direct, powerful counter to Sennacherib's arrogance. The message to the Assyrian king is simply, have you not heard? Long ago I ordained it. In days of old I planned it. Talk about a massive perspective shift. The big revelation here is that Assyria's huge winning streak actually had nothing to do with their own greatness or their own gods. The source material asserts that all their conquests were simply permitted by a higher sovereign power. Assyria was, completely unknowingly, just acting as a tool within a much larger historical plan. They strutted around thinking they were the masters of history. But the text reveals they were literally just an instrument in someone else's hand. And that brings us to an absolutely incredible piece of divine irony. See, in ancient times, the Assyrians were notoriously cruel. When they captured foreign kings, they would literally put a hook in their nose and lead them around by a rope just to humiliate them. So the prophecy God gives to Isaiah takes that exact cruel imagery and flips it right back onto Sennacherib. He promises to put a hook in his nose and a bit in his mouth and force him to retreat exactly the way he came. The very tactics Assyria used to humiliate others were about to be metaphorically used on them. Section 4, the fall of Sennacherib. And here we are at the climax of our historical mystery and the sudden, unbelievable reversal of power that finally explains why Jerusalem was never conquered. According to the biblical record, a cataclysmic event happens overnight. 185,000. That is the massive number of Assyrian soldiers that fell dead in their camp in a single night. Now, historians still debate the natural mechanics of this. Some suggest a sudden, incredibly virulent plague swept through the camp, but the text attributes it entirely to divine intervention, a totally sudden, miraculous defeat that broke the siege in an instant. And you've got to look at how this timeline plays out for the arrogant King Sennacherib. Overnight, his invincible army is totally wiped out. Shortly after, he's forced into a humiliating retreat back to his capital city of Nineveh, exactly like the prophecy said. And then, sometime later, the ultimate irony hits. He is actually assassinated by his own sons while worshiping in the temple of his God. Think about that. The king who mocked the God of Israel as being powerless is murdered in the house of the very God he believed made him invincible. A rapid, total, and absolute downfall. Section 5, facing life's overwhelming threats. Okay, so we have this incredible, ancient, historical drama, but why does any of this matter to us today? How does the source material connect this geopolitical standoff to our own personal lives? Well, the speaker in our source text draws a really powerful parallel for us. Look, we might not have ancient Assyrian armies camped outside our bedroom windows, but we all faced our own modern sieges, right? These are those seemingly insurmountable giants we deal with. A sudden illness, deep financial ruin, or completely broken relationships. Problems so massive that, honestly, just like that Assyrian army, they seem to mock us and make us feel completely trapped, isolated, and powerless. But the main takeaway from this explainer is the source material's proposed solution to those exact sieges. It's about recognizing that no crisis, literally none, is too large to fall outside the bounds of a higher sovereignty. The text urges us to look at King Hezekiah's example. Instead of throwing our hands up and surrendering to despair when the math says it's impossible, it presents this profound idea. What if we surrendered our problems to the power that controls history? What if we brought those terrifying fears directly to prayer? Which leaves us with this final, truly crucial question posed by today's material. When you find yourself surrounded by life's insurmountable threats, those dark moments when the walls feel like they are completely closing in, the text challenges us to ask, will you surrender to the fear of the siege, or will you surrender to the sovereign who actually controls the flow of history? It is a fascinating historical lesson with an incredibly powerful personal application from our source. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.